Rain patted gently against the tinted windows of the sleek black SUV as it pulled into the circular driveway of the Delmore Grand, a five-star hotel recently acquired by the powerful and notoriously private CEO, Alana Brooks. Clad in a plain beige trench coat, modest jeans, and sneakers, she stepped out without the fanfare or entourage typically reserved for high-powered executives. Her natural curls were tucked under a simple wool cap, and she carried a weather-worn leather tote that gave no clue of her wealth or authority. She had chosen to arrive anonymously, deliberately avoiding prior notice or executive treatment, intent on experiencing the hotel as any regular guest might. This wasn't just any visit. It was a surprise inspection to see how the hotel treated people who didn't arrive in limousines or flash designer labels. The doorman offered only a passing glance, holding the door for her without so much as a welcome, distractedly checking his phone as she entered the grand marble lobby. The air inside was scented with imported orchids, and the lobby buzzed with the soft hum of quiet conversations and piano jazz echoing from the bar. Alana approached the gleaming front desk, where a sharply dressed receptionist stood behind a polished marble counter, whispering to her colleague while looking down her nose at Alana. The CEO greeted them with a warm smile and pulled up the confirmation email on her phone, stating her reservation under the name A. Brooks. The receptionist took the phone and barely glanced at it before returning it with a passive-aggressive smile that didn't reach her eyes. I don't see you in our system," she said flatly. "Are you sure this is the right location?" Her tone reeked of skepticism, laced with an assumption that Alana had made a mistake. Alana remained composed and confirmed her reservation, adding that it had been made through the corporate portal 2 weeks in advance. Just then, the hotel manager, Walter Simmons, a balding man in an expensive gray suit, walked over to the desk. The receptionist leaned toward him and whispered something while tilting her head subtly in Alana's direction. He approached her with a thin smile that seemed more performative than polite. "I understand you're having some difficulty," he said in a patronizing tone. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked this evening. Even if you had a reservation, it may have been released due to your late arrival." Alana checked her watch. It was only 7:30 p.m., well before the standard check-in cutoff. She gently pointed this out, but Simmons shook his head. "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the inns on the west side? They're more flexible with their clientele," he added with a smirk that barely concealed his condescension. Other guests walked by, some being greeted by name, champagne flutes offered before they even reached the counter. Alana noticed how their skin was lighter, their clothes more formal, their treatment drastically different. Her expression remained calm, though her eyes flickered with something deeper. Disappointment, perhaps, or resolve. She asked once more, this time firmly, to speak with someone from the corporate division. Simmons dismissed her again. "There's no need to escalate, ma'am. We're just following protocol. If you'd like, I can call you a cab." A younger bellhop in the corner looked uncomfortable, catching Alana's gaze but quickly turning away. The receptionist had already begun helping the next guest, signaling that the conversation was over. Alana stared at them both in silence for a beat longer than was comfortable, her presence oddly commanding despite the simplicity of her attire. With grace and precision, she tucked her phone back into her bag, nodded once, and turned to leave. As she exited the building and stepped back into the light drizzle, none of them knew that they had just turned away the very woman who signed their paychecks. None of them suspected that their assumptions and poor judgment were about to spark a chain reaction that would shake the entire establishment to its core. As the SUV door closed behind her and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Alana's reflection in the rain-slicked window remained expressionless. But inside, her plan was already forming. This hotel would not be the same by the time she was finished. The rain had stopped by morning, but the memory of the previous night clung to Alana's thoughts like the mist that still hung low in the streets. She hadn't needed the confirmation. She'd seen this kind of quiet exclusion before, cloaked in pleasantries and policy, delivered with the finesse of those practiced in hiding their prejudice behind protocol. But seeing it play out in her own hotel against her own name was something different. Alana had spent years building her empire from scratch, working long hours, fighting against stereotypes, clawing her way through industries that weren't made for her. Owning a hotel like the Delmore Grand wasn't just a business venture. It was a statement, a triumph, a monument to everything she had overcome. And yet here she was, turned away like a trespasser, her presence treated as a threat rather than an honor. What disturbed her more than the insult was how routine it had seemed, as if her being denied had been just another day in the life of the staff, performed with the casual arrogance of people who thought their actions would never face scrutiny. Back inside the lobby, the energy was shifting into the rhythm of a new day. Guests wheeled their luggage toward elevators. Espresso machines hissed at the cafe counter, and staff moved briskly in and out of service corridors. Walter Simmons, the manager, stood by the reception again, sipping from a monogrammed mug and giving curt nods to passing employees. The receptionist, Brittany, sat poised behind the counter, polished and attentive to those she deemed worthy of her smile. Neither of them gave a second thought to the woman from last night. She had been processed, dismissed, and forgotten. The idea that she might have been someone of importance, or worse, someone powerful, never once crossed their minds. That kind of miscalculation would have consequences, but for now, their confidence remained intact. Meanwhile, Alana sat at a quiet cafe a block away, her laptop open and her fingers gliding swiftly across the keyboard. She wasn't just reviewing hotel files. She was watching real-time security footage of the lobby from the hotel's internal surveillance system. As CEO, she had access to every camera, every check-in log, every employee record. Her eyes didn't blink as she replayed the moment Brittany smirked while brushing her off, or the way Simmons's eyes had narrowed with contempt before waving her toward the exit. She took screenshots. She noted timestamps. She flagged patterns of behavior, tracking how certain guests, particularly people of color or those dressed modestly, were given markedly different treatment. Her heart wasn't racing, but her mind was sharp, calculating. The public face of leadership might have been grace and composure, but Alana had built her empire on discipline, foresight, and strategic retaliation. This was not going to be ignored. It was going to be handled. Hours passed. The hotel was nearing peak occupancy. A convention of regional business executives had booked the top floors, and the entire team was abuzz preparing for the arrival of one of the hotel's largest shareholders, whom they assumed would be coming later that evening. That same shareholder was already in town, and had a very different kind of meeting in mind. At 2 p.m. sharp, Brittany's eyes lit up when a tall man in a designer blazer approached the desk. She straightened, greeted him with perfect customer service warmth, and swiftly completed his check-in without delay. He was neither rich nor poor, neither black nor white, just the kind of polished ambiguity that seemed to comfort the staff. In the background, Alana watched from a distance through the tinted glass of a luxury sedan now parked discreetly across the street, headphones on, listening to live audio from the hotel lobby via security feed. Every word was ammunition, every assumption a mistake waiting to be exposed. Later that evening, Brittany was scrolling through Instagram on her break, liking a photo of her brunch while gossiping with another desk clerk about the weird woman from the night before. "I mean, did you see those shoes? Beat up like she walked here from a bus station." She laughed, not knowing her voice was being recorded on internal comms. Walter was right. Some people just don't belong in places like this. Neither of them noticed the new email that had just hit their inboxes. A high-priority internal memo from corporate had been marked urgent. It called for an all-staff briefing at 9 a.m. the following morning in the top-floor executive conference room. Attendance was non-negotiable. There was no explanation, no agenda. Just a time, a place, and a subject line: leadership visit, final compliance review. Brittany groaned when she saw it, assuming it was just another annoying corporate lecture. Walter, on the other hand, felt a flicker of unease. The phrasing was odd, and the last time something like this happened, it had led to a complete staff audit. Still, he shrugged it off, brushing it aside in favor of another glass of top-shelf scotch. He had helped himself to from the VIP lounge. Upstairs, the presidential suite was being prepped for the mysterious guest who had booked it under a corporate alias, someone with clearance high enough to keep their name redacted in internal systems. Housekeeping buzzed with excitement, speculating that it might be a celebrity or billionaire philanthropist. The truth, however, was far more disruptive than anything they could have imagined. As the night settled, Alana returned to her temporary accommodations in another hotel across town. Not nearly as glamorous, but discreet. She reviewed the final agenda for the next day's surprise meeting, aligning it with corporate HR protocols and legal compliance mandates. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. But reform required exposure. And exposure meant catching people in the act, stripping away the plausible deniability and forcing accountability into the light. She knew exactly how to execute it. She had done it before in boardrooms where men had tried to outtalk her, in deals where investors tried to shortchange her, and in interviews where she was expected to prove she deserved her own success. Tomorrow would not just be a reckoning. It would be a reminder of who held the real power and what happened when those in power chose silence over confrontation. Morning broke over the city with a golden hue spilling across the glass windows of the Delmore Grand, casting long shadows on the polished marble floors of its pristine lobby. Staff moved briskly, straightening floral arrangements, checking uniform creases, and aligning brochures at perfect 90-degree angles. The memo from corporate had sent a wave of nervous energy through the hotel team. Whispers filled the air. Was it a surprise inspection? A corporate shakeup? An undercover investor? Theories abounded, but no one knew for sure. Brittany reapplied her lipstick in the staff lounge, muttering that it was probably some diversity audit nonsense, while Walter adjusted his tie with an anxious glance at his reflection. His typical smug confidence chipped by the unpredictability of it all. Neither of them suspected that the woman they had denied just 24 hours earlier was already on site. Hidden in plain sight, overseeing preparations for her own carefully orchestrated storm. Alana arrived through the service entrance, unmarked, unnoticed, wearing a tailored navy pantsuit that radiated authority. Her face was calm but resolute, every step purposeful as she made her way through the back corridors she had memorized during construction tours long before the hotel's grand opening. She was accompanied by 2 senior executives from corporate. Both men older than her, both visibly nervous, not because of her anger, but because they had seen what she could do when she was disappointed. At her instruction, the presidential suite on the 21st floor had been converted into a makeshift war room. A whiteboard outlined internal protocols and timelines. A laptop on the table streamed live security footage from the hotel's public areas. Legal advisors were on call, and 2 members of the brand's Diversity and Ethics Council stood by, ready to document every interaction. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a masterclass in exposure and reform. At precisely 8:55 a.m., a flurry of staff began making their way up to the top-floor conference room, some clutching notepads, others whispering nervously into their radios. Walter led the charge, wearing a strained smile and trying to project control, though sweat had begun to dampen the collar of his shirt. Brittany followed, confused and irritated, still unaware of just how much her world was about to shift. By 9 a.m., the long mahogany table in the executive conference room was surrounded by department heads, reception staff, operations leads, and key team members who were told nothing other than that corporate leadership would be addressing them shortly. Coffee carafes and breakfast trays were arranged along the side wall, untouched. The room buzzed with speculative chatter until the sound of a door unlocking silenced them all. Alana stepped inside with the measured grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms of greater power and pressure. She didn't need to introduce herself. Yet, the unfamiliarity of her presence caused a few people to glance around in confusion, while others simply assumed she was a regional director. She said nothing at first, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make everyone slightly uncomfortable. Then she spoke, her voice clear and composed. "Before we begin, I'd like coffee brought in for our senior shareholders and executives. Would someone from the front desk kindly assist?" Her eyes drifted toward Brittany and Walter, who instinctively rose to volunteer, eager to impress who they assumed was a visiting VIP. Brittany was already halfway to the door when Alana added, "Please bring it yourself. I want our staff to feel involved in the hospitality they offer." Walter forced a tight smile, motioning for her to go ahead, trying to save face, unaware that each moment was a carefully placed trap in the larger orchestration. While Brittany stepped out to retrieve the refreshments, Alana moved to the head of the table and placed her tablet on the polished wood surface. The other executives remained standing behind her, their expressions unreadable but stern. She clicked a button, and a muted clip began to play on the flat-screen TV mounted on the far wall. Lobby security footage from the previous night. It showed her arrival, the condescending glances, the dismissive gestures, the denial of service, and finally, her silent exit. A few gasps rippled through the room, and the air thickened with unease. Several team members began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, eyes darting toward the door as if escape might still be possible. When Brittany returned, balancing the tray of coffee cups with performative sweetness, she froze at the sight of herself on the screen, her voice echoing in the background as she laughed at Alana's shoes. Her face paled as she slowly realized what this meeting was. Walter, too, had turned rigid, mouth slightly agape, calculating how much had been seen, how much had been recorded, how much was already too late to fix. Alana turned off the video and stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm Alana Brooks," she said calmly, though the weight of her presence struck like thunder. "CEO and majority owner of this hotel chain." Silence dropped like a stone. Several jaws dropped. Brittany's tray shook in her hands, and a cup of coffee spilled down her blouse, but she barely noticed. Walter tried to recover, stepping forward with a weak laugh, but Alana raised a hand to stop him. "Save it," she said quietly. "This isn't a conversation. This is a correction." She turned to the staff at large. "Yesterday, I came here unannounced to experience the service our brand offers firsthand. What I received instead was discrimination, dismissal, and disdain. What I saw was the rot beneath the polish." No one dared to interrupt. The younger employees watched with wide eyes, while department heads took subtle notes, unsure whether to distance themselves or stay aligned. Alana continued, "This brand was built to elevate experiences, not exclude people based on shallow assumptions. Some of you failed that test in the most public way imaginable." She gestured to the screen again. "Everything you did, every word, every gesture, it's documented. And now it will be reviewed at the highest level, not just for individual accountability, but to reshape the very culture of this organization." She let that sink in before stepping back. "Today is not the end. It's the beginning of a real transformation. But understand this, there will be consequences. And they start now." Then she sat, her presence undiminished, as the room remained stunned into silence. The tension in the room clung to every surface, thick as fog and twice as stifling, as Alana's words settled over the assembled staff like a verdict. No one moved. No one spoke. Brittany, still gripping the now half-empty tray, looked as though the floor might give way beneath her feet. Walter, who had once carried himself with the inflated confidence of someone too accustomed to unchecked authority, now looked like a balloon slowly deflating, his posture caving inch by inch with every second of silence. Across the room, eyes darted between Alana and the screen, then back again, searching for some sign of reprieve or misunderstanding, anything that might lessen the weight of what had just occurred. But there was no misunderstanding. The woman they had dismissed and humiliated had revealed herself not only as the CEO, but as the architect of the entire meeting, the person whose signature underwrote their salaries and futures. Alana remained seated, her fingers laced in front of her, unbothered by the storm of reactions swirling in the air around her. Her voice, when she resumed speaking, was even calmer than before, but it cut deeper for it. "Let's start with honesty," she said, fixing her gaze on Walter, who flinched slightly. "Yesterday, when I approached the front desk, you both made a judgment based solely on what you saw. A black woman, dressed simply, traveling alone. No one asked clarifying questions. No one looked up my reservation. No one treated me with basic human decency." Walter opened his mouth to interject, but she lifted a hand, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not finished." He swallowed his words and sat back, the red rising in his cheeks. Brittany's face had lost all color. She looked at her shoes, then at the door, then back at Alana, trying to summon some kind of defense. I didn't realize. I thought, she stammered. But Alana didn't raise her voice. That's the problem. You thought. You assumed. You let your bias make the decision for you. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm, authoritative in a way that made excuses evaporate on the tongue. This hotel was created to be a symbol of excellence, not exclusion. I didn't build this brand for people like me to be judged at the door, turned away with a smile and a lie. Her words carried across the table like a slow wave, crashing into every person seated there, challenging them to examine the roles they played, whether actively or through silent complicity. She tapped her tablet and brought up a new screen, charts, graphs, and internal reports showing customer service patterns, complaint statistics, and flagged interactions, many of which bore disturbing consistencies. Guest satisfaction scores were markedly lower among non-white patrons. Response times to service requests varied based on names and reservation sources. Even the language used in staff notes revealed coded prejudices, subtle but consistent. This isn't an isolated incident, Alana continued, her voice like a scalpel. What happened to me last night was just the most visible tip of a deeper institutional problem. And that problem has a name: complacency. She let that word echo. It's the complacency that lets a receptionist believe she knows who belongs here. The complacency that lets a manager support that behavior instead of correcting it. The complacency that lets talented people be pushed out or passed over because they don't look the part. A young woman from housekeeping, seated near the back of the room, shifted in her chair, her face betraying an emotion somewhere between vindication and discomfort. She had been working at the hotel for over a year and had quietly endured cold shoulders and whispered remarks, always wondering if anyone in leadership actually saw what went on behind closed doors. Today, someone had, and that someone was sitting at the head of the table, refusing to let it be swept aside. Alana turned her attention to the rest of the staff, scanning the room slowly. I could have fired people last night. I could have pulled funding, shut down this location, replaced the management team before sunrise. But that would have addressed the symptom, not the disease. What I'm doing instead is much more difficult and much more permanent. She stood, finally, and the air in the room seemed to shift with her. Effective immediately, Walter Simmons is relieved of his duties as general manager of this location. Brittany Langford is suspended pending a formal review by corporate HR and our ethics board. The sound of pens scratching across paper stopped. No one breathed. Brittany's mouth opened again, but the words wouldn't come. Alana continued, unwavering. In addition, every department will undergo mandatory anti-bias training. Not the box-checking kind, but immersive, accountability-driven workshops led by third-party consultants. And this location will serve as the blueprint for a system-wide transformation across all our properties. She let those final words hang heavy in the air, a declaration not just of policy, but of purpose. Then, and only then, did she allow the room a moment of exhale. Her gaze softened, just slightly, and she looked at the employees not with anger, but with challenge. This place can still be what it was meant to be. A sanctuary of excellence, where everyone is welcome and everyone is valued. But only if we're honest enough to confront the rot, brave enough to dig it out, and committed enough to build something stronger in its place. With that, she turned off the screen, gathered her tablet, and nodded to her executives, signaling the end of the meeting. The staff didn't applaud. They didn't speak. Many just sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd witnessed. And as Alana stepped through the doorway, her heels clicking against the polished floor, she wasn't just walking out of a meeting. She was walking into a new era, one she would shape with precision and unshakable purpose. As the door closed behind Alana, the atmosphere in the room didn't simply deflate. It collapsed under the weight of realization. For several long moments, the team remained frozen, as though any movement might call more attention to their complicity. Brittany's breathing was shallow and erratic, her cheeks blotched with the red flush of embarrassment and disbelief, as though she was still struggling to separate the truth from the performance. But this wasn't performance. This was reality, and it was sharp, immediate, and unforgiving. Walter remained seated, unmoving, his jaw tight and his gaze fixed on the polished table in front of him. His career, once built on the illusion of confidence and control, had unraveled in front of his peers like a poorly tied knot. No warning, no negotiation, just a clean, public severing of his authority. The room felt like a courtroom after a harsh verdict, and everyone inside it understood that the trial wasn't over. It was only expanding. As Alana's executive team dispersed, the boardroom broke into hushed whispers, then silence, then the slow and reluctant return to operations. The HR team remained behind, along with the regional director, who immediately began collecting witness statements and launching the official review. Brittany was asked to hand over her access badge and remove herself from all digital systems pending investigation. She moved like a ghost through the hallways, her presence now evoking stares instead of deference. Some staff avoided her entirely, while others whispered behind her back with a mix of fear and fascination. Her arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something more brittle, an internal reckoning far more painful than any corporate punishment. Walter, meanwhile, was escorted from the premises before noon. His final walk down the lobby not the commanding stride of a manager, but the slow shuffle of a man who had been outplayed and outclassed in every possible way. Throughout the day, word spread like wildfire. Employees at all levels began to examine themselves. Conversations shifted from casual gossip to urgent reflection, and the typically pristine environment of the Delmore Grand suddenly felt volatile and raw. There was no attempt to hush the incident. Alana hadn't left behind a trail of NDAs or whispered apologies. Instead, she allowed the impact to settle, choosing transparency over quiet correction. A memo was circulated to every hotel in the chain within hours, detailing the events at the Delmore Grand, not to shame but to warn. The email didn't name names, but it laid bare the behavior, the assumptions, and the consequences with blunt honesty. Attached were the outlines of the new accountability protocol, a mandatory anti-bias initiative titled Belonging by Design, set to be rolled out over the next 3 months, including intensive workshops, supervised case studies, and peer assessments that would directly impact employee evaluations. Behind closed doors, Alana convened with her legal and ethics teams to draft amendments to the company's internal compliance charter. From now on, frontline employees would be empowered to flag concerning behavior from management without fear of retaliation, and regional directors would be held accountable for any patterns of discrimination or exclusion. But more than that, she introduced an initiative close to her heart, a mentorship pipeline specifically for underrepresented staff members seeking leadership roles in hospitality. It was a bold structural shift, one that would slowly change not just who made decisions in the company, but how those decisions were made and who they benefited. These weren't band-aid solutions or PR moves. They were surgical, deliberate, and deeply personal. Because for Alana, this wasn't just about justice, it was about legacy. The local press caught wind of the shakeup after a staff member anonymously leaked snippets of the meeting, and within hours, the story hit hospitality blogs and business forums. CEO enacts sweeping change after experiencing discrimination in her own hotel made its rounds on social media, racking up views and sparking heated debates. Some praised her decisiveness. Others questioned why such actions weren't taken sooner. But Alana remained unfazed. She wasn't interested in optics. She was interested in outcomes. When asked for comment, she issued a single statement. Accountability doesn't begin when a scandal breaks. It begins the moment you recognize a failure and refuse to ignore it. The words resonated far beyond her brand, drawing attention from other CEOs and industry leaders who began reevaluating their own corporate cultures and blind spots. Internally, the mood of the Delmore Grand began to shift from panic to possibility. With the departure of Walter and Brittany, space was created for newer voices to step forward. People who had long worked in silence, overlooked but invaluable. An assistant manager from housekeeping, a first-generation immigrant with a spotless record and high staff approval, was named interim operations lead. His appointment was symbolic but also strategic, showing the staff that leadership could reflect competence over charisma, substance over surface. Meetings that had once been led with authority now opened with questions. Employees who had once felt invisible were now asked for their insights. The cultural walls that had long held bias in place began to crack under the pressure of change. Alana returned 2 days later, not to inspect, not to scold, but to observe. She walked the halls without fanfare, greeting employees by name, asking about their experiences, listening without judgment. Her presence was no longer hidden, and neither was her power. But she didn't wield it like a weapon. She used it as a mirror, forcing people to see themselves more clearly. In the break room, she shared lunch with the concierge team. In the laundry facility, she spoke with staff about ergonomics and workload. She knew that culture didn't shift because of policy. It shifted because leadership chose to engage with the smallest voices as if they mattered most. And as she left the hotel that evening, this time through the front door, the doorman held it open with both hands and bowed slightly. Not because she was the CEO, but because he knew exactly who she was, what she'd done, and why it mattered. 1 week after the storm that had rattled the foundation of the Delmore Grand, a cautious but perceptible calm had returned to its halls. But it wasn't the fragile quiet of suppression. It was the stillness that follows a transformative reckoning, the kind that rewires not just procedures but perspectives. Staff members who had once whispered about changes with suspicion were now discussing them with sincerity. The lounges and lobbies no longer hummed with the subtle tension of judgment, but instead echoed with a new rhythm, one that made space for inclusion without it feeling performative or forced. And at the heart of that transformation was Alana Brooks, not looming like a specter of retribution but quietly present, offering guidance through presence, not pressure. Her strategy had never been about vengeance. It was about shifting culture from within, and she knew that for transformation to last, it had to be modeled as much as mandated. Mid-morning light streamed into the ballroom, now converted into a training space, as the first major workshop of the Belonging by Design initiative began. Employees from all departments, valet, housekeeping, concierge, food service, sat together in mixed groups, a deliberate choice meant to flatten the hierarchy and encourage cross-functional respect. A young black woman from guest relations stood at the front, leading the session with poise and confidence. She had been promoted following Alana's visit, not out of optics, but because she had long been the most empathetic and intuitive staff member on site, her potential previously ignored in favor of flashier personalities. Now she was training the very people who had once talked over her. As she clicked through slides about unconscious bias, she didn't point fingers. She invited introspection. And it was working. Eyes didn't just glance, they lingered. Hands didn't just write, they took notes with care. The resistance that had once clung to the staff like an invisible wall had cracked. Some parts were already crumbling. Upstairs, in the newly remodeled executive lounge, Alana stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The silence here was different, reflective, grounding. She had just finished a call with a board of directors from another hotel chain who had asked for her insight on implementing similar reforms after reading about her actions in an industry journal. Requests like this had been coming in daily, not just from hospitality but from retail, banking, even tech. What had begun as an isolated moment of discrimination had morphed into a leadership parable. Not because it was shocking, but because it had been handled with surgical clarity and without public theatrics. She hadn't aired grievances on social media. She hadn't demanded viral justice. She had walked into her own house, seen it for what it was, and chosen to rebuild it, not for appearance but for permanence. That afternoon, she called a town hall meeting in the lobby, open to all, from the executive chef to the janitorial crew. There was no podium, no microphone, just Alana, standing in the center of the room, arms relaxed at her sides, eyes steady. What happened here wasn't new, she began. It was just finally seen. Her voice carried not through volume, but through truth. We talk a lot about hospitality in this business, about making guests feel like they belong. But the truth is, we can't offer belonging until we practice it among ourselves. Heads nodded. Some staff lowered their eyes, still reckoning. Others raised their chins, eager to be part of something different. This place will not be perfect, she continued, but it will be honest. We will listen to feedback. We will act on mistakes. And we will be transparent when we fall short. She paused, allowing the silence to settle. I will hold this hotel to a higher standard. And I expect each of you to do the same. Not because I demand it, but because you believe it matters. There were no roaring cheers. No performative applause. Just a long silence, then a few tears, and finally, the slow, deliberate sound of clapping that built not from excitement, but from respect. It spread through the room like a tide, genuine, grounded, powerful. One of the newest employees, a young man from security who had been overlooked since day one, approached her after the meeting. I just wanted to say, "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "I didn't think people like us ever got to be in rooms like this, let alone change them." Alana smiled, a rare softness overtaking her normally composed expression. "That's the thing," she replied. "We've always been in the room. They just stopped seeing us. Now they will." But change, Alana knew, was not an event. It was a process, daily, deliberate, sometimes invisible. Over the following weeks, she visited other properties in the chain unannounced, replicating the same challenge she had issued at the Delmore Grand. Each time, she did not arrive in designer gowns or with assistants at her heels. She dressed simply, checked in under a generic name, and observed. Some hotels passed, others failed, but each one received a visit afterward, where she revealed herself not as a critic, but as a collaborator. She didn't punish hotels for struggling. She only punished those who refused to grow. And slowly the brand evolved. It became known not just for luxury, but for integrity, for the quiet commitment to justice, even when no cameras were rolling. Back at the Delmore Grand, the final ripple of Alana's first visit came in the form of a simple plaque, mounted on the wall beside the reception desk. It bore no grandiose language, no mention of the scandal or firings. Just a quote in clean, bold lettering: "Excellence without empathy is not excellence at all." Beneath it, her name. Guests paused to read it. Staff passed it daily. And over time, it became more than a motto, it became a mirror. Not everyone stayed. Some left, unable or unwilling to adapt. But those who remained helped shape a space that honored more than elegance. It honored humanity. In the end, the greatest revenge Alana delivered wasn't firing those who wronged her. It was ensuring they would be replaced by people who knew better, did better, and made sure it never happened again.